welcome back to TCN Talks and Anatomy of Leadership. This is part 2 of our conversation with Colin M. Fisher on unlocking the secret power of groups. We're continuing exactly where part 1 ended, so if you're just joining us, you may want to listen to that episode first. And now, here's Chris Como and Colin M. Fisher.
And so I love on page 10, you cite an experiment where team members were asked what they estimate the contribution to the team. And when you add those up, they add up to like 235%, meaning we overestimate our own contribution. In fact, in the early part of your book, you cite great evidence that in many cases, you get a negative effect from a team versus the individuals. I want to let that just settle upon people for a second. Like, better performance as an individual versus as a team is kind of the norm, is at least what I feel like you're saying. And hospice and palliative care teams that I work with, they're interdisciplinary by design. So what the hell do we do with this quandary? How can leaders help diverse professions, like all these, hospice, nurses, physicians, social workers, really harness those differences and get, it feels like synergy is more like a unicorn than the norm, is what I feel like you're calling out, Colin.
Yeah, I mean, that is the sad truth, is that becoming more than the sum of our parts is definitely this, unicorn that we're chasing, and it is rare. Most of the time, the reason that we think things like meetings or group projects often sound bad to people when I say hey, you want to have a group project or you want to have a committee or something like that, those sound inefficient to us, that we associate them with inefficiency. But that's largely because we don't design work for groups that well. This comes back to the beginning of our conversation, where we have designed organizations and professions and almost everything else to manage individual performance. That we hire people as individuals, we evaluate their performance as individuals, you get rewarded or punished as an individual, and that we don't put nearly as much thought into how we structure our teams. How do we reward them? How do we put them together? How do we hire a team in the first place? And how do we assess its performance? That we have much more primitive tools for doing those things than we do relative to individual performance. So, I mean, the first part of this is, again, putting your kind of architect cap on, and to make sure that you've got the structure in place that's favorable to groups interacting. And that means you've got, collective goals that we all understand where we're trying to get to in the same way. We have a clear picture of what that future looks like. We understand why it's important for us and for the organization, and often for the patient. And that shared understanding needs to get repeated, because, when it's like a game of telephone. When a whole bunch of different people are trying to get the same message, it gets distorted fast, right? Like when we all whisper to the next person, here's what the goal is and what's supposed to be there. And one of the great conversations I've had as part of writing this book was with a military leader who said he was taught that the job of a leader is to be the repeater in chief. That, your job is just to keep saying that goal over and over, keep reminding people, keep people on the same page, because we naturally come apart over time. And so I think a lot of this is just, we're in these situations where as an individual, we're often on multiple teams. We're often in these matrixed organizations where we've got multiple lines of reporting, multiple different ways of organizing functions and projects and other kinds of things. And we get a lot of confusing messages. It's hard to stay coordinated with that core group of people. And one of the biggest things is just to, make sure that we are keeping that kind of North Star, that place that we're trying to get to, that vision of the future, front and center in everybody's mind, so that we can make our decisions about how we're going to coordinate accordingly. And then, all the other stuff that we've been talking about composing the team, about creating norms where people can speak up. Those are things, again, that are not natural for us, that we have to make a special effort.
Mm-hmm.
That our brains were not designed to be put into bureaucratic organizations. That, we are social group creatures, but that, we're actually not all that rational. And so, a lot of these structures assume that everybody's, gonna behave in this more, hyper rational economic fashion. And that's just not how human beings behave. And so the kind of art of leadership is navigating this gap, but that gap is there every day. And if somebody's not attending to it, being the repeater in chief, being the architect behind these groups, that eventually just the natural forces of a whole bunch of individuals who are busy people with different values and different goals are going to drift a little bit apart than they were yesterday, unless we make a special effort to stay together.
Have you ever read the book, Colin, Orbiting the Giant Hairball? It's about this guy who was at Hallmark. And when I got my master's in leadership, Dr. Lee Thayer would always talk about it. It's the hairball was the analogy to the bureaucracy. And this one guy, Hallmark, if you know, like the cards, Hallmark cards. And so like you think it'd be the most creative, flat organization, but it was this bureaucracy, and he called it a hairball, and he figured out how to orbit around the hairball. And they started bringing him into meetings because he was so disruptive to the bureaucracy. It's a cool read, kind of getting people to think differently. Like if you're saying, like there's organizations being designed in this hyper rational way, and you think of an organization like that that's supposed to be super creative, but yet was overly bureaucratic. And even the way the book is designed, and there are like pictures inside and scribbles. It's just really awesome because it makes you think differently. And because he naturally thought differently, he was just almost like this oddball, and they kept bringing him into meetings because he just disrupted the bureaucracy. And they didn't quite, like he would make up his title. They're like, I don't know, make up your title. And he always thought maybe he'd get fired, but he just kind of disrupted it. So anyway, I'm just curious if you ever bumped into that in your research.
Yeah, no, I haven't, but that sounds terrific. I'll definitely look that up.
So you talk about the power of relaunching a team, and I think that's because some people are listening and going, yeah, man, but what do I do with the one that I have or I'm inheriting? So when does a team need a relaunch, and what does an effective relaunch maybe actually look like in practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's so much, unfortunately, of this research, as you say, is saying, hey, you need to get stuff right from the start of this team. And that message is true. So we have what we call the 60-30-10 rule for thinking about what makes a difference in a team. And 60% of a team's performance is determined before they even meet. That the stuff about composing it, what their goals are going to be, what tasks they're going to do, those things are usually determined before the team even gets together. And then the 30% is right at the start, at that launch, at this time where we're forming these norms about how we're going to interact, where we kind of start to perceive whether this is a psychologically safe environment, whether we feel this sense of work-based trust with our colleagues. Those things take root really fast, and that they're much harder to undo than they are to put in place in the first place. And only about 10% of a team's performance is, usually can be shaped by this sort of real-time coaching of an ongoing team. Now, 10% is still a lot. Like, I don't want to, even though it's a lot less than 90, if you can improve all your teams 10%, you're doing pretty good. You'd be a leader in line for a promotion if you're improving everyone 10%. So that's not nothing. But it's not proportional to the way that we usually devote our time and attention to leading teams. Usually people are spending, much more like 60% of their time and attention on trying to coach these ongoing teams and put out fires and troubleshoot and manage interpersonal conflict. And so if you find that's how you're spending your time. That like it feels like I can't take my eyes off these teams. I'm always trying to help them with some problem that seems like it was preventable. Then that's definitely a time for a relaunch. But I think relaunches are great tools so that anytime you have a good excuse for one, you should just go ahead and do it, because there's always an opportunity for improvement. And so what I mean by a relaunch is that we are trying to create the perception that this is a new team working on a new task, and that we're doing everything we can to create that perception, where we're changing our meeting, we're changing the kind of structure of the meetings, or even maybe who's facilitating that meeting. And that when we come in, you want to make your intentions with this as explicit as you can. To say, I think this is a real opportunity for us to have a fresh start, and this is a great time for us to do it. So here's here's how I see our goal. This is what we're trying to accomplish. What does everybody think? And so there's this first, thing that's in any launch of a team, where we're trying to create a shared sense of what our goal is, and that we want to make sure it's clear in everyone's mind. What mountain is it we're trying to climb? We want to make sure everyone understands why it's important, why we're going to do that. And that we also want to give a team the sense that it's going to be challenging, that it's going to require their buy-in, their engagement, and their full set of knowledge and skills. Because when we come back to this research, it shows that teams are often less than the sum of their parts. That's often because people don't have the sense that they need to try as hard as they can. Where we have this natural tendency to want to conserve our own resources, our own labor, our own attention. And if we think we can get away with doing a little less, it's only human to often do that. So that we're really trying to create this sense, but that it needs to be shared. And that means we need to make sure everyone's understanding it, to give people an opportunity to maybe tweak what that goal is, or if it's really undefined, to have a deeper discussion about, hey, why, what do we want to accomplish? What is important to us? So that's usually the first part of this relaunch. The second part of it is to really try to reset these norms, and that's usually the reason people want to relaunch, is that they feel like the norms of their group need a reset, that they have this false harm. People aren't speaking up. Or on the other end of the spectrum, we've got factions who are constantly fighting with one another, and people are disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing, because it's like, well, Bob says that, then I can't agree with Bob. And that when you're trying to reset those norms, it's hard. Like, you really have to make a special effort to do that. And I think getting everybody's commitment to say, I think we can be better than we've been, and here's how I think we can do that. But the first thing is that we're all going to feel safe to share what we really think, but at the same time, we're going to be respectful of one another, and that we're going to try and create a situation where it's us against the problem, not me against you. And that if we get into this dynamic of me against you, we've already lost. So that, when we speak to one another, and that sometimes if you've had the disrespect, a group where people haven't been as respectful to one another as they need to be, you have to, kind of reset these sort of kindergarten level rules of, like, we don't talk about the person, we don't insult one another, and those kinds of things. But that's often what you need to be doing. And then to often clarify roles. Why are we here? What are we trying to bring to this? And I love your question. What's your, at the beginning of this, what is your superpower? And often that is kind of what do you think your superpower could be for this group? What can you bring to us to make the chances that we're going to be more than the sum of our parts a possibility? And that, often leaders aren't putting people into the roles that that the person thinks they're best suited for. Often we're not giving people enough chance to show the full spectrum of what they're capable of and what they want to do and how they could grow. And so having this discussion where you can really get people reflecting on that, get people publicly talking about these things so everybody in the team knows, that way, even if you as a leader disagree with what one of your team members says that they ought to be doing or is their superpower, now you know that they think that, and that you can do a lot better job of managing them and managing the team with that knowledge than without it. So those are the kind of three big elements of what a relaunch would look like, where there's a discussion of the goals, there's a discussion of the norms, there's a discussion of the kind of roles and tasks that people are going to do in the team. And then there are real next steps with deliverables where there's stuff that we can see one another actually doing and to see progress towards these goals.
This is so good. Everything you just listed, maybe it was good intuition, maybe it was just dumb luck, but I had to coach my kids' soccer team. And where I grew up, we didn't have soccer. There was only 3 sports: basketball, baseball, and football. So because I knew nothing about soccer, a friend told me, hey, just ask the kids their superpower at the first practice and then kind of compose the team around that. And because I did know the normal positions, I literally composed the team around their superpowers. And I tell that story frequently because it's because of my lack of experience. I approached it with much more of a learning approach, and then stumbled upon this thing about superpowers and how to compose the team. And it was a fun year. We all had a blast. And yet quite often I think that, because I think I know what I know, and well, we've got to have this person, you got to have a director of finance, you got a director of HR. We miss that creation process of composing a team. And what I love about your book is, and you're also a great teacher, Colin, because I love how you keep bringing it back to key points. The other thing, I'm just listening to what you just said, your book highlights that there are hidden norms that just shape group behavior. And so how do leaders maybe surface those, like bring them to the surface? And, right now we live at a time where there's just, people are so much in their corners, especially in the States. We live in this polarized society. So after they unearth them, how can leaders cultivate this collective identity that transcends these differences and because we're inheriting people that, again, everybody's like, what team are you on? Are you on the red team or the blue team? Oh, well, you're not on my team. And then we bring that into the workplace. So yeah, how do they unearth that? And then how do we eventually get to that really collective identity?
Yeah, it's such a challenge, when we're trying to get people to cooperate across, these really deeply held identities and deeply held divides. I mean, that's, been one of the biggest challenges that humanity's faced throughout history, right? That we're trying, when we want to have a more peaceful society, a world where we treat each other better, getting people across these group boundaries is right at the top of the list of things that we need to do. Now, unfortunately, there's no one easy solution to that question, because whoever solves that problem is gonna be doing very well in life. That's a Nobel Prize winning kind of discovery. And but I think the way I would think about it, when you're at work, you do have the advantage of, we do have some shared goals that often don't have anything to do with those other identities. And that gives us a chance to create a sense of we that doesn't have that much to do with, your politics or things like that. And that the best way that we've seen kind of, people who were fighting across groups start to cooperate is by giving them common goals. And that work actually is a place where we have common goals that transcend a lot of these political divides. That, if you're in hospice, we're all still trying to help, this client, this patient, even if we disagree about other things, that's still something that we collectively want. And that really doubling down on what is it that we have in common? What is our common goal? And that, researchers call this a superordinate goal. What is the thing that transcends our group boundaries? that we can agree that we want to head towards. But the second ingredient there is interdependence, that I really have to depend on you to do your job for me to do my job. And the more that we have this really deep interdependence where you're going to, give me your part of moving towards that goal, and I'm going to use what you gave me to do my part of moving towards that goal. Now we have a relationship that's not about this group divide anymore. We have a relationship that's based on our progress towards our common goal. And so really focusing in on those things and focus and drawing attention as a leader when we're making these kind of small wins, these small acts of progress towards those goals, is important to creating that common identity. The kind of showing, hey, I'm going to lift up this moment that maybe everyone else didn't notice. But to me, it's symbolic of what I want our team to be about, what I want our shared identity to be. And so I'm going to make sure that everybody knows about that and that they understand that I think that's important and that that's going to start to create this culture of highlighting that kind of thing, of paying more attention to it, and us developing a more kind of productive shared identity. Now, norms, I think we've been talking about, and that they are the same, the basics of them, that we want to hear everybody's, questions. We want to hear their ideas. We want to get their authentic perspectives on different issues, but that we can approach them from this us against the problem perspective, rather than experiencing this as a threat to my identity when you say something I don't agree with, that, that I can go, oh, well, Chris is just trying to solve the same problem I'm trying to solve. So that's okay. It's not about me. It's about, that's really what he thinks we should do to solve this problem. That kind of focus can help. But that, these group fault lines, it doesn't take much for them to reemerge. And and I think the problem that we're seeing in the US more and more is that all these different issues have gotten bundled around these political teams. That in the book I talk about, the kind of silliness that politicians were debating, an M&M's commercial and what the M&M's are wearing. But that, like, your perspective on that was a proxy for your political beliefs on a whole range of other issues. And that's not something that's normal in other countries, where that we get this bundling of, you have to agree with your team about not just one thing, but about this whole range of diverse kinds of issues and perspectives. And it keeps, creeping up to, what music do you listen to, which movies do you like, and things like that, which shouldn't naturally be political, or which fast food restaurant you go to. Like, those aren't inherently political issues, but they've all kind of gotten eaten up by this kind of us against them mentality that's taken hold in the US. And it is more polarized than other countries, it very measurably so. And it should be concerning to people. That I think, in a way, that should be our top concern, is when we can't talk to each other, when we can't cooperate even on things we agree are important common goals. That's when we really have this kind of dysfunctional structure that, again, does come back to basic things about our political system and our two-party system and the way everything's kind of baked in the US that's not ideal. And that's really hard. And I hope people pay attention to it, but in a way, if you're just a manager in an organization and you can get people rallied around a common goal, whatever that is at work, and you can get them collaborating,
yes,
you're doing a little something, right? And so I think that in a way, that's the best small thing we can do, rather than being, oh, hey, here's how you lead a discussion about our political differences at work. Well, let's work on something we agree on. Let's cooperate on it. And in the process of doing that, in the process of valuing others' perspectives and contributions, there's going to be little acts of understanding where maybe we get a little bit less polarized.
Man, high five. That is so well said. We could take that one thing. In fact, I always close and remind folks about that Gandhi quote, be the change you wish to see in the world. Start in your sphere of influence there. And if everybody did that, all of a sudden, maybe we would heal that divide. So, well, let's go ahead and land the plane here, Colin. So if leaders could implement only one idea, which I hate saying that, because there's so many incredible ideas in this book. And again, everyone needs to get this book. It's probably the best book I've ever read about teamwork. But if they had one idea, maybe one of the most important ideas to dramatically improve their teams, what would that idea be? And then any other final thoughts you want to share?
I think it's almost this idea that I start out with, that our natural tendency is to analyze the world in terms of individuals. And if all you do is take a collective perspective, is put on your glasses where you're thinking, not what would make these individuals better, but what would make this group better, I trust you to be smart and reflective. And just like you were saying, Chris, to figure some of this stuff out just by paying attention to the group and thinking about that rather than thinking about individuals. So if every day you say, well, when you're thinking, here's this individual problem or here's this problem I have, and instead turn that into a we problem. What can I do to make us better? What can I do to make these groups better? So I would say just taking that collective perspective can be so powerful and enact so many of these changes that just kind of come from us overlooking the importance and the role of groups in our lives.
That's incredibly well said. Well, Colin, thank you. I'm actually thinking of several ways. We'll stay on after we're done here. I've got some ideas of how to bring you into this work that we're doing, because I think this is very powerful. In teamwork, my mentor, Dr. Thayer, wouldn't allow us to use the word teamwork. And we go, what is this deal? And actually, I think that, he was part of he probably even knew your mentor, and they saw that teamwork really was not the norm. We use the word freely, like, oh, go team, we are a team. But the reality is very rarely do you truly see teamwork or experience it. And I think that you have put together a body of work that can actually change that. And I have a sense that the timing of your book isn't like the time that we live right now. This is really important stuff. It's certainly important in healthcare at all times, but it feels like there's just a lot coalescing right now. There's so many industries that are in a state of flux, and about every 100 years or so, you get these like huge kind of changes, and all of that's culminating now. So again, just kudos to the great job that you've done to this. So to our listeners, we want to thank you. At the end of each episode, we share a quote, a visual. The idea is to create a brain bookmark, a thought prodder about our podcast subject to further your learning and growth and thereby your leadership. And we want it to stick. Be sure you subscribe to Anatomy of Leadership. We don't want you to miss an episode. We're really upping our game this year and breaking these into parts so you can digest them more easily. Tell your friends and coworkers about Colin's book. We're going to have an actual link to it. Also, The Anatomy of Leadership. It's easy for us to rail against the world and be frustrated by things. Let's be the change we wish to see in the world. So thanks for listening to Anatomy of Leadership. And here's our brain bookmark to close today's show.
One of the situations we really overlook the most is the group. The reason people behave the way they do is often because of the groups they're a part of, the social norms around them, and the bigger collective their individual performance sits inside. By Colin M. Fisher.